Shimi, I'd love to start off with you wearing your physician hat in particular and talking about some language and some concepts. So could you take us through what is menopause? What is periomenopause? What is postmenopause? What are the symptoms we should be looking out for? At what point for all three of these stages?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. So excited to be here. Getting right into it. So menopause is defined as, and gender is not binary, but we're talking about in a woman's life when basically the estrogen progesterone hormones get to the lowest levels, the ovaries are pooping out or just kind of declining. And there is a loss of menstruation for a full year. So that's the medical definition. And that's a really hard one. That even there begins some of the issues, because that's very hard to quantify for people. Is spotting a menstruation, is breakthrough bleeding, who knows? But that's the diagnosis. The average age is 51, but the range could be anywhere from beginning of the early 40s all the way to the late 50s. So, it's this wide range, but on average, we know North America is 51. Perimenopause are symptoms that begin around a year before that year of no menstruation. So perimenopause is by definition about 2 years prior. And we start to see symptoms and just kind of a laundry list or things like hot flashes, which we've all heard of, night sweats, vaginal dryness, mood changes, really importantly, sleep disturbance, weight gain, and osteoporosis, which is more metabolic, we don't feel it, and also impact on heart, cardiovascular. So again, we don't feel that. The ones we feel were that first list, mood, sleep, hot flashes, night sweats, and I think the skin dryness, vaginal dryness, also change in libido. So those are kind of the constellation of symptoms. I'm sure they're different for every woman, but that's the general list there.
And can I ask you, so I know that for many women, we associate menopause with hot flashes, for example, but you mentioned a few things that I think are important: sleep disruption and mood fluctuation. Can it be that as a woman entering perimenopause or in menopause that you can experience mood disruption or mood fluctuation, mood disruption without hot flashes? And then as a woman who is constantly feeling cranky all the time anyways, like I constantly am struggling with my sleep health and I feel cranky all the time. So how can we discern the difference between this is linked to menopause and just general life crankiness? And I don't know about you all in the chat board, you feel free to just throw some comments up, but I feel like I'm cranky all the time.
Yeah, great question. And Ritu, all of this is happening on the context of stress being the #1 health epidemic right now. Women have, a higher propensity for the physical effects of stress in terms of like cortisol, adrenaline, chronic disease. And the next major health epidemic that's on board is loneliness and disconnection. So these webinars are a great idea. So you're right. So how do we figure it all out? Well, I think just being aware, education like this, age, just tuning in to that there is that biological aspect to it, and knowing and educating yourself. And I've seen so many women in my practice, I've been a psychiatrist 20 years, who come to me with depression, with marital problems, don't like their children anymore, or going on disability from work, or having issues in the workplace. And they don't realize that there is that link in terms of what's happening with their body and mind. I didn't mention brain fog, but brain fog was controversial. Like, is it part of menopause? But, the studies are showing that there is this cognitive aspect, forgetfulness. I have ADD. It's definitely been worse the last year. I'm heading into menopause. I just turned 50. So, it affects all aspects of our life. And I think the biggest thing is, if you're a woman around this age period, stop, think about what's happening with your hormonal system, with your periods, check in with yourself, look at those symptoms and see, are any of them applicable to you? The other one, sorry, I didn't mention is libido changes as well. and weight gain, and fullness in the breasts or anything related to estrogen. Those are also changes. So it's really across the board, but it's going to happen to all women at some point.
So interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And in watching the chat board, I can see that so many people are talking about mood swings, sleep disruptions, brain fog, the hot flashes. It's fascinating how much is being shared about this. So one of the things that I have been thinking about in the context of preparing for today and wanting to be in a place where we create workplace cultures which do a better job of supporting us as women through our menopause journeys is to normalize the conversation and to talk about this more in depth, and for us to be personal about it to the extent we feel comfortable sharing, recognizing that women have different experiences, but it's important to hear about these experiences so that we do in fact normalize the discussion. And so on that note, I would love to have each of us share a little bit about our respective menopause journey as a way to model what it looks like to be open and to share about our experiences. And so Maureen, I wanted to start with you. Would you feel comfortable sharing with us a little bit about your journey with menopause? What did it look like for you? What did you learn? What do you wish you knew then that you know now? Anything that you can offer us so that we all can leave this webinar feeling better equipped with knowledge.
Sure, happy to. So I saw some of the comments in the chat and somebody said, hey, my perimenopause was way more than 2 years. So was mine. Mine was probably 14, 15 years. It started in my early 40s, and that's when the hot flashes started and the sleep interruption and all of those sorts of things. And then it just sort of progresses as the years go on. So, there's so many aspects to menopause, and they're not all bad. It is shocking in the workplace when all of a sudden you get a hot flash. And I don't know about all of you, but culturally, my family didn't do an awesome job of talking about this, right? So you're sitting in a meeting and not just you have a hot flash, but all of a sudden you are soaked in perspiration. Like that was my hot flash where, I was sort of pulling my clothes off my body, and it's shocking, and you have to continue to perform. Maybe you're talking in a meeting and it's hard. It's really hard not to get distracted by these physical symptoms. And so, as I say, I didn't have a lot of preparation, despite the fact that I have older sisters and a mother. It's just not information that a lot of people shared with me. So that was probably the most troubling thing, was just every day was a surprise. And when I say it's not all bad, and there's a spectrum when we talk about mood changes. There was a little bit of, it was as though I had been on an anesthetic for 25 years and somebody had removed the anesthetic. And Dr. Kang will tell you that when estrogen and progesterone start to leave your body, that need to be likable, that need to be attractive, all those things that women are not just socially conditioned to do, but physically conditioned to do, starts to go away. And there's something kind of liberating about it, right? When you're at the office and you finally kind of call out bullshit for the first time in your career. And there's a nice joining of the roads. Menopause and the confidence that age brings you, two of those things I think are worth celebrating too, that you kind of find your voice as you age. And so we can't just focus on what's bad. But I would say, you asked Ritu, what did I do? I went and saw a doctor and got hormone therapy. And Dr. Kang will talk a little bit about that. There are some studies out there that are completely misleading, that have misled our health practitioners for years and years, and women have not been offered these opportunities. And for me, it helped with my sleep. It completely eliminated hot flashes. It eliminated the moods that were not constructive, like the rage. it put a lid on the moods, and it got rid of some of the more difficult physical symptoms. So that was my journey.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for sharing. I just want to take a moment. First of all, I'm not sure if you clocked, Maureen, the hearts on the screen and the comments in the chat board, but I'm just so grateful to you for openly sharing in a very candid way. You know, if you had told me, as someone who was born and raised in the legal profession, that one day a very prominent member of the legal community in Canada, co-chair of a very well-reputed firm, would openly be talking about her experiences with menopause, her health, in such a visible and supportive way, I would have been like, get out of here. But here we are. And I just want to honor you for your candor and for being with us today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I think this is what we have to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to lead on this. But I'm of the view that as a senior woman, and there aren't a ton of us, this is my role. I have to actually clear the path for those behind me. And this is a big issue. Yeah.
I love that. It for me goes back to that motto, or that mindset of like, we lift while we climb. And it's like when we, as we rise as women, as leaders in the community across cultural identities, it's so important that we share our wisdom so that the generations who follow us can benefit. So thank you so much for that. So Dr. Shimi Kang, many may recognize you from television because you're often on television. And just to let you know as well, Shimi, and I'm calling you Shimi and not Dr. Kang, if that's okay with you, but I'll go back and forth. Shimi is also a really well-known researcher, and some of the questions have come up on the board around research. So I'm going to come to that in a moment, but do you feel comfortable sharing your own journey? And maybe there's a few things that you could let us know about, and then I'm going to talk to you about some of the research questions that have been coming up.
Yeah, for sure. And please call me Shimi. I put the doctor on, so, you know, there's some context to what I'm saying. And so I think for me, and I do want to pick up on what Maureen mentioned, that it's not all bad. And I think that's where I'm at right now. So I just turned 50. I haven't had the horrible hot flashes, and but I have noticed sleep and mood changes. I also live with a genetic condition that I didn't know I had, and it was diagnosed around the age of 38 after my third pregnancy, my third child. And so I headed into a really severe spiral of chronic pain. My body doesn't make collagen. I don't have the gene for it. And as we get older, we lose collagen. That's why we get wrinkle and joint pain. But for me, it happened very fast. So I was actually put on progesterone over 10 years ago, before I was 40, because progesterone is a builder of connective tissue and ligaments, and it can help with chronic pain and sleep. So probably because of that, and I don't know for sure, I also try to practice a lot of self-care. I sleep 8 to 9 hours a day. I try to get my 10,000 steps in every day. It's a big deal in my life because of my health and what I do. I have to practice what I preach. It hasn't been so bad so far, and it might be a combination of all these things, including the hormones. So right now, what I want to do is just take a moment and talk about the positives I might be experiencing, which is kind of what Maureen alluded to. Menopause is about two main hormones. So there's estrogen and there's progesterone. And I think if we step back to what I call the neurobiology, here's our brain. How do these hormones affect our brain and our behavior? Estrogen, if you step back for a moment and think, Mother Nature, what does Mother Nature want? We evolved in nature, we developed in nature. Mother Nature wants procreation. Mother Nature wants babies, it wants the next generation. That's what it wants. So estrogen, for about 2 weeks of the month, roughly, we are being driven to be attractive, not just to a mate, but to society. So that's where the people pleasing comes from. There is, yes, personality, but there's also neurobiology around being the people pleaser, the guilt associated with saying no. And then progesterone is about nurturing. Obviously, ourselves and our babies or the next generation, Mother Nature wants community and society to be healthy. So we are nurturers. Progesterone drives us to that. So in some ways, we're hijacked a bit by these hormones to be people pleasers and nurturers and caregivers. And that leads to things like the imposter syndrome and guilt and all these things we hear that are statistically more common in women, that impact us in so many ways. And then menopause, these hormones leave the building, and suddenly we can have our voice. We can be less guilty. We can assert our thoughts and opinions and care for ourselves first. So I think that's the beautiful part of it. There's a wonderful book and podcast. I think I sent you, Ritu, maybe it's called The Upgrade, which goes into the deep science of this. But I think that's a really important point. And so many women post-menopause say, you know what, I feel so free, I feel so confident. So I think that's something for us to look forward to. One thing I want to correct is it doesn't have to be 50. There's many women who have surgical menopause if their ovaries have been removed, if you've gone through chemo or radiation for any kind of event. Often there's women, as you know, in their 20s who may go through it if your ovaries are impacted. So it's not necessarily 50 if you've had one of those situations in your life.
So I just want to recognize what you just shared around I'm going to use the word freedom or liberation that we can experience as women in our journeys with menopause that I hadn't even considered. And in fact, Maureen, I'm going to bring you on as well. I'm thinking, what a beautiful way to reframe an experience that can be challenging, but also can open the door to a new way of living. And as you may know, as someone who is an authenticity and a belonging advocate, diehard, to me, the ability to stop people pleasing as a woman and speak my mind and be like, F that. I'm just going to do me and be me and like done with that. Like, what a beautiful, liberating experience to have in a really critical moment, a seminal moment in our career journeys, like around our late 40s into our 50s. Like, what power and freedom, because in that key age moment, for many of us, we're also intersecting with the rise of our leadership. So Maureen, do you want to speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And so I know I said earlier that I feel it as a senior woman, it's part of my role, but not part of my official role. It is part of my role as a woman to share my experiences because we're all having them. And so I do so quite regularly at our firm. The women at our firm meet very, very regularly. We talk about a whole bunch of things, including this. We had a women's dinner in Toronto last week, and one of the more senior women we started talking about menopause, and she leaned forward, and there were a bunch of younger women. She goes, ask me anything. I'll tell you what you need to know. And it's that kind of candor, I think, that is really critical. So the other thing I would say, Ritu, is we talk as though everyone is really self-aware, that we all know when we are in menopause. I've met a lot of women who don't know that the source of their unhappiness is likely hormonal. And we've all met these women. And I think I told you the story once of one of the men I work with saying, what's with the senior women in our firm? They all get so angry. And one of my female counterparts responded with, well, all the nice ones quit. but that was a joke. But I think the answer to that is, as I say, that removal of the anesthetic, the loss of the hormones, the loss of that desire to please. If you're self-aware, you recognize it, but some people don't. And I saw a few comments in the chat about rage, that rage is a real thing. I have seen that expressed, that people express that, and you kind of go, yikes, what's going on with that woman? So when it comes to like why we talk about it, it is to lay the path, to give support, but it's also to help people be self-aware when they are actually being compromised by these symptoms and they don't recognize them themselves. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I want to dig more and more into the symptoms. So in a moment, everyone, let me take a step back. We received questions that fell in two buckets. We received the questions about, I'm going through menopause, or I will be going through it, and what do I need to know? Help me with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, the alphabet. And we'll see, you see this as well on the chat board. And then what we also did is receive questions about how can we support women through their journeys with menopause in the workplace. So we're going to speak to both. I'm going to come to specific symptoms and how to navigate these symptoms in the workplace in a moment. I want to keep going with normalizing the conversation around talking about women's health at work because of the impact it has. I just wanted to share a little bit of my own personal experience. So I'm in my late 40s, I'm 48. I'm not menopausal. I don't know if I'm perimenopausal. So Maureen, you know, I only really started thinking about this year, and only because Instagram was talking to me about it. And then I ended up having conversations, and now I'm starting to think about it. But I will share this with you. I, as a woman, have a few menstruation related disorders that cause me to have excruciating menstrual cramps on a monthly basis. And when I say excruciating, I mean debilitating pain. In fact, one of my disorders gives rise to like a knife like stabbing pain that happens, if not, every other month, let's say, but then I have throbbing pain. It like literally takes me out, and it's getting worse with age. And this is one of the reasons I have started tuning more into my menstruation related health, because this year I'm like, what the F? Isn't this supposed to be going away and getting better, not worse? But one of the things I have started to do, again, as part of my commitment to live authentically, is I will get onto meetings and people will say, how are you doing? And I will be like, I'm not well today. I'm having really bad menstrual cramps. Or I like literally sit here with a heating pad. It's also a biomat, helps to bring the body into parasympathetic flow relaxation state. But I put it on I constantly have it on my belly area because of my cramps every month too. And I name it, I'll say it as a way to normalize. And I don't care if men are on the call. I'm like, I don't care. I want to normalize that as a woman who's working and as a business person, as a member of the working world out there, that my health is not separate and apart from who I am as a worker. And so this is one of the reasons I'm talking more and more about it. And I think that this conversation is so important. Now, let me connect that with some really important data that I came across, which is the following. 4 out of 5 working women and British women say managing perimenopause and menopause symptoms at work is a challenge, according to this year's Menopause in the Workplace survey from Carrot Fertility. Around 1/3 of women report being concerned about how menopause symptoms could be an obstacle to career growth. Like, women actually are worrying. And I know this because I'm seeing your comments in the chat board and the questions that were sent in around like my mood swings, the hot flashes during meetings, the sleep issues, like the body joint pain, like being distracted. This is going to get in the way of my career advancement. And so I'm wondering, Maureen, Shimi, maybe why don't we start with you, Maureen, and then Shimi, I'll come to you. Given this data, why are we not talking more about our experiences, or what do you wish you would have had back then that you now have?
That's interesting. And I come at this, as a high performing professional in a professional services firm. So my take is probably going to be a lot different than a HR take. So I preface my comments with that. But yes, for sure, it can impact your progression in your career. At its worst, when you're sleep deprived with menopause. I mean, I remember having nights where I was lucky if I got 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and it wasn't proper sleep. It was that sleep where you're just kind of hovering above proper sleep the whole night. And then you have mood issues, and you're less patient with people. You're more likely to be less diplomatic. In a world where women have fought really hard to get where they are, where being likable is still very, very important to your success. So I'm of two minds here, where I really applaud people who are prepared to normalize this conversation, but I do not expect that everyone is prepared to do it. I think there are still aspects of it that are incredibly private, and some people don't feel comfortable talking about it. I think there are aspects of it that you don't necessarily want to make yourself vulnerable in the workplace and tell your coworkers that you are struggling or something less than 100%, because the minute you're vulnerable, life can get quite difficult depending on what your profession is. So I'm of two minds there, and my approach to this has been, I want to be the female leader that I didn't have when I was going through this. And I want to create a culture among our women, and it is pretty much exclusively among our women at our firm where we talk about everything. And if some of those women want to break free and be more open about what they're experiencing, I'm good with that. But I want to create a safe space where everyone feels comfortable and knows that the women before them have gone through it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's doable. Have a few laughs and share stories. And that's the space that I create. So I fall a little bit short of the, hey, let's go out there and talk about it broadly.
Well, I think it's a very important point. And Shimi, Dr. Kang, I'm going to come to you in a second. I want to acknowledge that I always say, share to the extent you feel comfortable sharing. Each of us gets to decide. And for those of us who are in a place and in a moment where it does feel good and safe to do that, or you feel like you can do it, then I would say yes, for sure. And then if it doesn't feel right, then absolutely not. We each get to decide. So thank you for highlighting that. Okay, so Dr. Kang, Shimi, so much I'm sure that you have to share with us on what has been asked and also in the board. So over to you for some of your thoughts.
Yeah, just to comment on this, I think it is wonderful. We've made progress and we've gained ground, but I do feel there's a bit of an earthquake under our feet as women and women leaders in particular. There is a backlash, and Ritu, you're like a warrior champion out there talking about issues, but I do think that we have to be careful that there's a response happening. And I think we shared a quote that when you're used to privilege, equality can feel like oppression. So I do, say we need people to be warriors and disclosing, but also we got to recognize the current climate that it's not as where we need it to be yet in terms of equity. And we're certainly seeing that, especially in the online world, where it is, women in general are more likely to receive hate and negative comments and cyberbullying around 800% more than a male leader, let's say. So when we look at medicine, why are we in this place? Part of it is there's a gender bias in medicine, in the studies. There's studies, literally studies that have been done on things like cholesterol and statins that barely included women, like 5-10% of the studies. So I think that's really important in all health conditions. When we look at a study, historically, a lot of times women weren't included in those studies, or there were circumstances in those studies where women are maybe primary caregivers for elderly or children or in their community, or for whatever reason, couldn't be involved. So a lot of the data we read when we get a medication or we read a study may not even be applicable to a woman's body. So I think that's the other aspect there. We have a long way to go. We're getting better. But we do know now that there is more ground. The country of Spain this summer gave not medical leave, but days off work for menstrual problems. So that's a huge step from a legislative perspective. Whether women will actually use it or not get penalized for using it is yet to be determined. But we're getting there through efforts like yourself, Ritu and Maureen, and all of the women who are talking about it. And so I encourage everyone to take those steps.
So let me ask you this, Shimi. One of the questions that came up on the board: is there any research being done that takes a look at intersectionality for women and menopause? So breaking down racial or ethnocultural differences as it relates to our experiences with menopause?
As far as I know, there are some ethnic differences with menopause. There are reported in the literature, women of African origin may have more likelihood of hot flashes in particular. Not really sure what the reasoning behind that is, but it is the one ethnocultural aspect there. We are seeing other kind of general connections to things like smoking, weight gain with menopausal symptoms. But no, there's just not enough, and it's a classic thing that we see in medicine. It's like, where are the studies for the women? And even if we look at big issues like heart disease and cancer, even in those, we don't know enough about exactly how it's affecting women different than men. And so that's where we're at with menopause too.
Well, as someone who is an equity advocate, I'm going to say the following, that this is an example of misogyny embedded in yet another system, healthcare, around research and inadequate amounts of research, and taking a look at intersectionality, because intersectionality matters. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm going to end there because there are other important things that need to be said, like questions that I want to ask, but know that I have said it and I think it all the time. Okay, so let's do this. Let's talk about some of the questions that we received. And there were so many questions in the chat board as well, or comments in the chat board related to this. And I'd love to hear from the both of you about the following. How do you manage, as a woman, symptoms in the workplace? So, for example, how do you manage hot flashes? You're in a meeting and suddenly a hot flash strikes you. What do you do, or how do you manage that? So why don't we come to you, Dr. Kang, first, and then Maureen, maybe you can explain what did you do to manage?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you some tips. It hasn't happened to me, so Maureen would probably be better to do that. But I think we want to first get back to this idea of honor what's going on. This is millions of years of DNA, our biology speaking directly to us. Okay, so it's easy to be frustrated, be angry at ourselves. So many women are angry and disappointed with their own ability to override these symptoms. Why can't I just tough it out? But we're talking about adrenaline. We're talking about our millions of years of DNA. We cannot override this, so honor it. And that's big step number one, and work with your body. Let's not battle against ourselves because it's at an inconvenient time. I would step back and say basic self-care is, you've all heard it before, but my mantra is simple is not easy and knowing is not doing. We all know the very simple things, but these are not easy. Routine regular sleep, routine regular exercise, drinking water instead of coffee. All of these things build up and help us have more resilience in those moments where we might be on the spot. The easiest thing I would suggest just slow down your breathing. Slow it right down so that you can reduce that adrenaline surge. We have receptors in the top and bottom of our lungs. Here we are. I'm going to bring my little friend out. Top and bottom of our lungs. These are connected to our entire nervous system. This is simple, not easy. We know breathing is important. We know it. Are we doing it? Once you are a little bit grounded, then you can make a decision. Do I need to leave this meeting? Do I need to speak out? Do I need to just pretend it's not happening? Ask for a window to open, a glass of water. But you want to make those decisions in a calm mind, what I call an interactive top brain, not a reactive amygdala where you're either going to freeze, get anxious and stuck and not know what to do, fight, get irritated, or flight, avoid or run away. So, those are just some simple steps that you could follow, but I'd love to hear, Maureen, how you handled it. And I think it depends on the situation too.
Yeah, and some of it's not handleable, right? I mean, if you got a hot flash in a meeting and you are drenched in sweat, I mean, there's nothing you could have done to stop it. It never felt to me like it was emotionally linked to anything or linked to stress. It's just the most difficult thing about this is you can't anticipate. You can't say, if I do X, I'll be able to avoid the hot flashes. You just can't. So, sometimes I'd wear layers because you're either hot or you're really cold because you've just had a hot flash and you're drenched. But none of it's very satisfactory, if I'm honest with you. You can also always tell the menopausal women because they often have fans in their office and have them pointed at their faces. So those are bandages that you put on, and I think, Ritu, your inclination to say, let's talk about this more might just mean that people don't look at you sideways when you're drenched in a meeting, and they look at you with empathy and understanding as to what it is you're going through. I think for me, one of the most debilitating symptoms was the sleep. Honestly, really never getting a good night of sleep for a couple of years. And I found that the more I exercised, the more likely I was to get some sleep during the night or a deeper sleep. So as Shimi says, that self-care where you say, okay, how do I help my body want sleep more than it appears to? But again, my answer to almost all your questions is I finally went to see somebody about hormone therapy. And for me, it really worked. And I saw some people, say that they had issues with hormone therapy. Like you just keep going back and they can readjust, and more progesterone, less estrogen. And some people go on testosterone as well at this stage for the libido issues. Just keep trying. And there are some physicians out there, some of them are private options, but who really know what they're doing. And for me, that made all the difference. And everything else is just kind of managing these horrible symptoms otherwise.
So thank you so much to the both of you for sharing. I'm also watching the chat board closely, and I'm noticing that a few of you have shared. So Carol mentioned keeping a heating pad, a fan, a handheld fan, and an ice pack in the office, like all brilliant ideas. I'm picturing when I go to my soca fests, like parties on the weekend, I have a few girlfriends who carry in their purses like these handheld battery operated fans to cool down their faces. But I can imagine like keeping that at your desk or in your person. Like one day, let us all be in a place where if we're having a hot flash, we can pull out our battery operated fan and be like, whatever. And as Maureen, you mentioned, have no one look at us sideways. And Martina, I see that too, a USB charged purse fan. A few of you have purse fans. So what a great idea. So Shimi, I want to ask you two things based on what's been coming up in the chat board. First of all, can you just talk quickly about the link between caffeine and hot flashes, because that keeps coming up and a few people have asked about that. And then the second thing, could you speak to hormone replacement therapy, which Maureen has alluded to?
And Shimi, the other thing I was going to say is for me, alcohol was another thing. Like I basically gave it up because it impacted sleep, but I think it also helps with the hot flashes. But anyway, that was my personal experience.
Yeah, I would say thanks so much. So caffeine's a stimulant, nothing wrong with it. I'm literally drinking it right now. But it is a stimulant. Sugar is as well, nicotine, certain medications, and all of those can accentuate, trigger that adrenaline response, the hot flash, with also the heart racing, also anxiety, right? So another part of it is the mood swings, but there's anxiety, panic attack that might be part of it. And so they can all be linked. Now, everybody is different. The human brain has a neural fingerprint. So what works for you may not work for someone else. So we have to give ideas and suggestions, but try not to shove it down someone else's throat in the sense of, they really could have a different reaction. Now, hormone replacement therapy, complicated topic. I think in general, as Maureen alluded to, there was some studies that became sensationalized in the media, and then later on were, somewhat retracted in terms of links to breast cancer, uterine cancer. And we know in general, that for some women, hormone replacement therapy isn't a good option if there is a history of those hormonal cancers in a personal history or in the family. And that would be something that that very small subset of women would need to be very careful and talk to their physicians about. For a majority who don't have that personal or family history, it can have huge benefits. But again, the body and mind are fully interconnected. Some women do well with estrogen, others with progesterone. And so it's not a quick fix either. These things do demand a bit of trial and error, consultation, good, physicians that are willing to listen. And I think the role of even beyond hormone replacements, diet, let's get back to a bit. Our diet, when we're having sugar and processed foods, that can wreak havoc on us. Exercise is a powerful antidepressant, powerful brain optimizer, regulates our metabolism. So we want to really look, I know we've all heard it, but across that board of health spectrum, and keep an open mind to prescriptions like hormones. And also, I would say, as a psychiatrist of 20 years, antidepressants can be very helpful because of when we have chronic stress, we need cortisol. our cortisol levels. We can only make so much. Our adrenals can fatigue. We can no longer make cortisol. Our body starts pulling progesterone and to make cortisol. So many women are experiencing perimenopause in some ways, but it's also related to chronic stress and that cortisol system, which is the same system for depression and anxiety. And so treatments, all of the treatments, including sunlight, vitamin D, exercise, and antidepressants may be a really good option available. So, I think the message here is there's no quick fix. Everyone's unique. Build a team around you, but don't give up and just say, there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah.
There is something that can be done.
Okay, so my brain is dancing with so many thoughts, and I can see from the chat board in yours as well. So first of all, in the chat board, is this helpful? What you're hearing from Maureen and Shimi, has this been helpful for you thus far? If you could just let us know, because I haven't done a check-in in a minute. Okay, so lots of yes. Wow. Okay, look at that. Overwhelmingly yes. Two things, Shimi, that I wanted to comment on and share. First of all, what I'm really taking from you, and by the way, I am learning a truckload as someone who is in her late 40s. Like, I personally am really benefiting from this. So thank you so much. One of the things that my brain is going boo on is what I would call holistic health. Like, some of the key foundational pillars of how to stay healthy deeply apply to our health as women navigating menopause. High quality sleep, a healthy diet, exercise, building a more resilient nervous system, using breath work, all of minimizing alcohol intake, using prescription drugs when needed, using natural remedies when needed. So basically all those holistic health practices, so important. One last question, and then we're going to get to what do we do in the workplace? So Shimi, one of the questions I saw that came in advance that I was deeply interested in is managing excessive sweating separate from hot flashes. So I'm not in menopause. However, over the last several years in my 40s, one of the things that I've noticed as part of my hormone shift and change is sweating. Like, no one told me suddenly in my 40s I would become a sweaty human being, but I constantly am sweaty and hot. So can you talk about how can you manage excessive sweating? Does anyone else care about this? I really do. Like, during COVID, it didn't matter because I didn't leave my house. But now that I'm leaving my house again, I'm like, I'm leaving my house as a sweatier person. Can someone help me here? So and look at the yeses rolling in. Okay, thank God. Thank you. Thank you. No one talks about this because it's embarrassing. F that. Let's talk about it. Okay. And then we have to talk about workplace support.
I'm going to give an answer that maybe is, again, it's not a quick fix. Sweating is a symptom of what's called autonomic dysfunction. We essentially have, to simplify, two nervous systems. We have the survival nervous system, which is running on adrenaline, cortisol. Not much happens there other than freeze, fight, flight. I mentioned that anxiety, irritability, distraction is the flight. And then we have a system called the parasympathetic nervous system, or the growth system. Sweating is your body telling you you're in that survival system. And it could be so many things. It could be menopause, perimenopause, it could be anxiety, it could be a very busy day and not kind of taking in and grounding. But of course, we can do all the right things and it's still firing. So that's beyond our cognition. And we say, okay, what am I? And so first step is always go back to that basic self-care. How am I doing? Second is there is that autonomic instability that can happen as we transition through menopause. Some you just kind of hunker down and keep doing it and it will pass. Others, it might be a symptom of something bigger. So you want to check in. We do, I know we talked about it. If we step back, humans, we did not live past 40, 50 for most of human history. Our life expectancy was not 78 like it is now for women in general, or 82, or whatever it is. So when we look at what if we're doing the exact same things and we're not coping, that's our bodies telling us we have to make change. And trust me, I was floored. I was in the hospital, I was on disability because I didn't listen to my own body myself, and I knew better. So I think part of it is step back, look at your life. What micro adjustments can you make? as well to your own daily choices.
I'm so with you. Like it's a screaming affirmation for self-care. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, 4 minutes in particular, and I need 1 minute to wind down. So let's say 3 minutes. In the remaining 3 minutes, let's talk about how can we support women in the workplace? Like, what do we need our workplaces to do more of in order to be in a place where we can support women navigating through menopause? So I have a list I created in advance for today, but let me check in with you, Maureen, and then I'll come to you, Shimi, Dr. Kang, and then we can wind down. So Maureen, what would you share?
Yeah, I would, and I've already sort of declared my bias that at least in my work setting, I think it works best for the women to lead together and talk to each other about this issue and give each other support and start with normalizing within our own community. And so that's how we're leading at Osler, the women at Osler. But I don't for a minute suggest that that's the appropriate solution for every business, or that there isn't sort of a human relations solution that is broader, but that's how we're managing it.
Thank you. Shimi, is there anything that you wanted to add from your lens?
Absolutely agree with Maureen. And the only thing, and I know she believes it as well, is try to find those men again, gender's non-binary, others who are your allies and supporters. I've been seeing Bill Williams on the chat throughout this, and there's a great example. We need to kind of build that sense of community and try to bring people in for sure. And so be brave and get the support. And if there is that backlash, if there is that criticism, that's okay too. That's part of our journeys, and you will survive, but get that support with you along the way. And I do think now there is more holistic information, I would hope, and that conversation is opening up. So if your healthcare professional isn't open, it's okay to shop around, to look further, and to find someone that helps meet your needs.
I love that. I love all of that. Everyone, let me just take a moment to add a few key takeaways from my perspective, wearing my leadership, organizational development design, DEI hat, creating cultures rooted in authenticity and belonging. Education and training for me is paramount. I think that having targeted training programming for women professionals on navigating this moment is critical, like we have done today. Like on a personal and professional note, I have learned so much. So thank you to you both for being here. But we also need education for leaders, for HR professionals, for DEI professionals on how to create more inclusive and supportive workplace environments for women who are navigating through menopause, like actually having specific training program and not putting everyone in the same room together, having specific like streamed programming. If you're in it, like what do you do during a meeting when you have a hot flash or a bolt of rage rushes through you? And then for leaders around, a woman colleague pulls out a fan, how do you not look at her sideways? That type of thing. Also, I think it's really important that we educate and train all of our team members about how to speak openly about menopause without stigma, understand it both through a physical and mental health perspective, as has been underscored today, how to address it sensitively and fairly, and then being in a place where we talk about it consistently. The other thing I wanted to highlight, and this came up in the chat board from a few of you, it's important to create menopause policies the same way we would have policies in other spaces. Creating a workplace menopause policy that maps out an approach to absences, increased sick days, sick leave, and having flexible work, because flexible work is so critical. If that has not been underscored for us during this difficult COVID experience, then I don't know what would have signaled that for us, but providing flexibility in how we work, because not everyone is the same. Each of us has our own respective needs. So those are a few of the suggestions. We are also going to send you a list of resources that we have curated after today's session for you to learn more about supporting team members in the area of menopause and how do you support yourself as well. I wanted to mention that if you want to reach out to Dr. Shimi Kang, she is active online. Here are her websites. Follow her on Instagram, LinkedIn. She's active, and some of her content, I use it across my sessions. So helpful. And then Maureen, as a sage, wise elder, but I don't mean like as I mean that term with the greatest of respect for you as a co-chair of a prominent firm in Canada. Thank you. You can reach out to Maureen here, visit her website, Osler, if you're ever looking for litigation support. You definitely be in touch with her. Thank you to the both of you for joining us today. I'm so grateful to you tremendously. Thank you, thank you, thank you.